There we go. I don't know how many of you are newbies and how many of you are not, but hi. Thank you guys so very much for putting up with all this BS. I mean, obviously, on some level, you don't have a choice, but super appreciate your patience in us dealing with all of this. Hopefully, at the end of the week, or maybe the end of next week, maybe gyms will reopen on a limited basis. I'm hoping maybe they'll do a thing where we have, you can go out in crowds of 20 or 30, and, maybe we can finish up class and get the tournament going and get you guys all sorted. But if that doesn't happen, we'll probably try to keep up with videos like these so that, people can work on their skills while we're waiting. So what I'm going to try and do is do basically what would have been day 7 for you guys. Day 7 is review day, like I mentioned last time we had class. Review day typically starts with basically we start from our regular, beginning of class review and go from there from the top down. So starting with, doing the footwork across the floor, doing cuts, doing guards, reviewing all the master cuts and all the other cuts that we learned, all the basic cuts that we learned throughout the 8 weeks. And from there, we would move into the last master cut, which I had mentioned is my least favorite, Scheitalhau. Speaking of which, when we go through this, I will try my best to put the names of the things in the chat, that direction, down there so that you guys can actually see how things are spelled. And those of you that are more experienced people, if I miss one, could you please put it in the chat? That would be lovely. So if any of you guys are up for it, I will go through, as well as my camera will hold up, all the things basically that we would have done in week 7. Also, this video will serve hopefully as a study guide for later classes and for you guys to refer back to. Hopefully after this plague nonsense is over and we can get back to our regularly scheduled program, hopefully this video will be helpful to everyone. So, first and foremost, I guess, for the newbies, obviously, I don't think many of you have swords at home. I know a lot of people lend out their weapons to some of you. If you have a sword, great. Feel free to follow along, without hitting any light fixtures. So, find a safe place. Try not to demolish your cat or your dog. It's happened in the past. They don't like it. For those of you that don't have a sword, appropriate things to simulate having a sword will be things like a broomstick or even a long-handled hammer. You can do maybe not necessarily the guards, but the cuts certainly, because it'll be weighted the right direction. If you happen to have, quite a long hammer, you can do guards with it. It just might feel a little silly holding a hammer over your head, but to each their own. So yeah, broomsticks, hammers, hockey sticks, basically anything that's a long stick. Preferably, I'd like it to be weighted, but you do what you can. If you want to follow along with your stick, that's fine. If you just want to follow along and do footwork, that's great. If anybody is interested, maybe after we go through all the regularly scheduled stuff, I can leave some footwork drills at the end if anybody is interested in that. Also, while you guys are listening, if you could do me a huge favor and just type your names into the chat so I know who's around, that would be super helpful. And like I said, this is recorded, so you guys should be able to look back on it, and hopefully the video quality maintains all the way through. That would be superb. Alrighty. So, I guess to get started, I am going to try my best to stay in the frame of my camera, which does not seem to be doing very well right now, but we'll work on it. And hi guys, thank you very much for putting your names in there. All right, so let's see. To begin with, let's start with footwork since all of you have feet. And I apologize, the video seems to be doing the wrong side because I'm getting very confused which is right and which is left. This is my right hand. My hair goes to the left. If you get all tangled up, I'm sorry, I am equally tangled up. I don't know how to flip the camera around. All right, so I'm going to see if I can't get the camera to point down at the floor and not trip on any dog toys. All right. All right, so your basic footwork and your basic stance, assuming, most of you are righties, is going to be left foot forward. This is my left, not my right foot back. You should be about shoulder width apart. You can be standing fairly upright. Don't lock your knees out. That's bad for your knees. If you bend your knees a little and just sort of relax, that'll do you well. And like I said before, you can, whatever's comfortable for you, you can be fairly stand up, you can be fairly squat down, just whatever's comfortable for you and your knees is the most important thing. Of course, your front foot should be looking at your opponent, which in this case is my camera. So you should always have your front foot facing forward, not like this. Like this is less dangerous, but still, if you step over your ankle, things are going to be bad for you. If there are any lefties on the feed, obviously it'll be the opposite. It'll be right foot forward as your dominant stance, left foot back. Again, in a nice square stance that's roughly shoulder width apart. And again, don't lock your knees, but don't, come all the way down here, wherever's comfortable for you, which for me happens to be about here when my knee isn't acting up. So this should be very comfortable. So of course, your first step is your simple step. So take a couple step back. So you take your front foot, it comes forward out of a stance. You take your back foot, it moves back into a stance. Forward, back. And that way, you can edge into range without ever switching your biomechanics and your body. So, again, if you guys are following along, which you may or may not be, do, say, 5 steps forward and 5 steps backwards. So, in, out, in, out, in, out, in, and then backwards, out, into stance, out of stance, into stance. Trying to keep your shoulders and your head fairly straight. Fairly level, so that way you're not, bobbing in and out like this. You don't want to look like a chicken while you're doing this. You want to stay fairly level-headed and fairly level-shouldered, so that way you can make your footwork sneaky. So that's your simple step. If you guys want to do, 10 more forwards and 10 more backwards, given, whatever space you have. If you do 5, 5, 5, 5, that's great. Go ahead and do that just so you can, warm up a little if you're following along and actually doing it. All right. Boop, boop, boop. And hopefully you guys could actually see my feet when I was doing that. I'm just going to put the names of the steps in chat real quick. It's simple English, but, sometimes it helps to see it visually. So, yeah, unfortunately my camera doesn't go this way, it goes that way. Triangle step. There we go. All right, so I just put in a chat the 4 steps we're gonna look over right now. So the next one we're going to do is a passing step. The passing step, remember, is as if you're on railroad tracks. If you're lucky and you're like me and you have hardwood floors, you can put one of your feet on one of the seams in the hardwood floors and just, march your way forward. So that way your feet stay on a nice, there we go, on a nice line. Your feet should never cross this direction. They should only pass each other this way, kind of like a Norcross. Yeah. So I'm going to do that back here again. I'm going to try my damnedest to get my feet into here. So again, you're starting in a stance. You move out of a stance and back into one. So this is still a stance, of course, on the opposite side. And this one is very hip heavy, driven by your hips. So those of you following along and actually doing things, do 5 forward and 5 backwards. Make sure that your feet stay nice and parallel to each other on this angle. They should not be crossing this direction. They should only be passing each other in the vertical. So we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we're out of room. So I'll do 4 backwards. So if you pick up bad habits like I do, don't drag your feet. It's typically not a good thing because every once in a while you'll fence on a carpet that's just really sticky and you'll eat it. So it has happened to members and instructors of the club in the past, and it's a terrible habit I picked up in part because I have really slick shoes. So I'll do that again, but better. And again, you should always be moving from a stance, out of a stance, and into a stance. So that way you're always set up for the next thing. Again, if you're following along and you have the room, try to take, 10 forward and 10 backwards. Make sure to keep your head up, back straight. It's your hips doing a lot of the work. Try not to twist your shoulders as you're doing it. It's your hips that are twisting, and your shoulders are moving with them, but your shoulders aren't driving the step, if that helps. So try to keep your shoulders calm. Alrighty. So, third is a triangle step. If you recall, the masters say you should leap like a gazelle. Usually by day 7, unless your knees are destroyed, I usually ask you to give it a good leap so that you can really, get around somebody's point. The triangle step is very good for cuts that often end up offline, like we did in week 6 and week 5. So the Zwerchhau and the Krumphau are particularly good with the triangle step, though, that being said, you should be able to throw every cut from every kind of step. So, remember again that the triangle step is kind of a 2-part step, kind of not. That you start with your feet like this, your back foot comes out forward and diagonal of your front foot, and then your front foot swings around behind so that you end up again in a stance, but slightly offline of your opponent. So in the video, I should be bouncing side to side off the center line, which in this case is my camera. Oop, that's not low enough. There we go. All right. So if I start on the center line, wrong direction. There we go, roughly in the middle of the screen, and I don't hit my chair. So, roughly in the middle of the screen, I should take my back foot, extend it out forward diagonally, and then take my previous front foot and swing it behind. So now you can see I'm off the center line because I am physically off the side of the center line of the camera. And then to get to the other side, you take your back foot, extend it forward and diagonal, swing your previous front foot around. And you'll see that I have zagged to the other side of the camera. So all together, see if I don't eat it in here. And try not to make the camera fall over. Of course, there's no backwards one because if somebody just runs at you, you're just going to backpedal. So one more time, if you guys want to follow along, if you have the room, see if you can't do 5 of them. And one more. Alrighty. Are you guys still with me? I hope so. I see that there's 9 people on. Hello, whoever joined. I have to find my power cord because apparently my computer's gonna die. So give me just one moment. I'm gonna mute this for just a sec. While I'm doing this and finding an appropriate three-prong plug in my old house, go ahead and do the first 3 steps. If you're following along and doing the steps, do a couple simple steps, throw in a passing step and maybe a triangle step, and you can mix it up. You can throw in, any kind of steps you want because in a fight, you'll be doing all of these things all together rather than, simple, stop. Passing, stop. You're going to be doing, simple, pass, triangle. So if you're following along, go ahead and, switch it up and do a couple of those things together. I'll be right back. All right. Old houses are not set up for three-prong modern technology, unfortunately. All right, so last but not least, we have the weaving step, which, as we discussed in week 5 and 6, is sort of you can do any cut from it, of course, like all the others, but it comes with a bit of theory behind it. As we saw in week 5, if the person moves off to your right, you step feint with your left and then step out with your right and zwerch them in the face. If they move with you, off to your left, then the same thing happens. You feint with your left. If I should say, if you know they're going to step off with you, together in the circle, you start with that left feint foot, and then step through with your right and crump them, because all of them have just walked into your sword. And as Andrew pointed out, a reminder that, again, if you talk about the weaving step to people outside our club, they'll look at you like you're weird. It is a relatively recent reinterpretation. If you ask people online about it, chances are they won't know what it is, in part because the person who came up with it hasn't actually put it out to the wider HEMA community yet, because he wanted to try it with us first. And I have to say, it works phenomenally well. So if you learn when to use the weaving step appropriately, everything works out great for you. So remember that this is a two-part step. It requires not the cooperation of your partner, because obviously when you're fighting somebody, they're not cooperating with you. But it requires you to note what they are going to do. So remember, when you throw your left foot out there, you're not actually moving into it. You're just opening yourself up to see if they twitch or to gauge their response. And honestly, realistically, what you're going to do is do it a couple times. You might throw your foot out there just to see what they do the first time and then not do anything. And then next time you can watch them twitch in which direction they go, and then, change your next step and your cut appropriately. So the basic weaving step looks like this. So you're lined up. This is my left foot, in case you can't mirror very well. You're sitting here with your sword. You throw your left foot out just to see what they do. If they do nothing, you step straight through. Right? So you throw your left foot out there and through, which is why it's weaving, because it goes out and through. And then on the other side, if you're a lefty, it's the same thing. So your right foot goes out and through. So when you're doing, when you're doing a Zwerchhau, you can go out, and then you go a little offline again. So in this case, instead of out and straight, you go out and off to the side. Because remember, they're going to step into your sword like we did on week 5. Same thing, reverse for the lefties. You take your right foot, you put it out, it goes this way. And then if they step into you as if you're going to do a Zwerchhau, or like you're setting yourself up for a Zwerch, goes out, and then your back foot goes diagonally this way and straight into their face. That one's a little harder to do in sequence, but actually, let's do this. So we'll do 5 of these. So with your left foot forward, your left, and then your right leg is going to go straight through. And that should end you in a good stance again. And then on this side, put your right foot out, and then step straight through. And that's your very basic weaving step without adding the extra angles that you might do with a Krumphau or a Zwerchhau. So do a couple of those. And so that way you make sure to end up in start in a stance, move out of a stance, end in a stance. So do 5 of those again. So foot out, step through. Foot out, step through. Foot out, step through. Alrighty. So does that make sense for everyone who's online? And hopefully you got all that. Normally I'd say there'd be a quiz at the end of this, but that's the tournament. Can everyone still hear me and see me? Awesome. I'll say, otherwise it's just dead silence. I'm not used to not having an audience. Is first, or I guess it's late for first, is anybody out there actually following along and doing the physical steps, or are you guys just watching? Okay. all right. If at least one of you's, doing it along with me, then I will keep doing it the way I'm doing it. So I am going to grab a sword. But Andrew, that's okay. You helped teach it with me. If you don't know what you're doing, I'm going to evict you from class. So, those of you who are physically following along with me, I am going to grab a sword, grab whatever implement of destruction you want, either a sword, a hammer, a broomstick, your cat's not recommended, but whatever you can kind of get two hands on about, yay far apart. So, 3 fists worth. Whatever you have, a rolling pin actually works shockingly well because it's the right weight in your hands. So if you guys want to grab any of that, I will move on to the guards section, and then we'll go over cuts after that. All right, my sword is behind me, and also I'm starting to get hot, so I'm going to take my hoodie off. All right, so I'm going to try very hard not to knock over my laptop. No guarantees. So, those of you who have a sword in hand or, something that allows you to have about 3-4 hands worth of grip, remember that if you are right-handed, you stick your right hand at the top of the sword just under the crossguard. Of course, this is the hilt of the shield. You have your crossguard, your grip, and your pommel. So if you're right-handed, your hand goes right under the grip. If you're left-handed, obviously your left hand goes under the grip. There are 2 choices here, 2 dominant choices. There's hammer grip, where it literally looks like you're gripping a hammer. Your forefinger and your thumb, wrong direction, and your thumb are pressed basically up against the crossguard. And then there's the handshake grip, in which your forefinger is under the crossguard, but your thumb is farther away, just like giving a handshake. Or a tennis grip, as this is also called, for holding a tennis racket. And like I said at the beginning of class, you will find that you have a tendency to switch back and forth between the two as you're cutting. But again, whatever grip you like to start with, that's fine. I prefer a hammer grip myself. Your bottom hand, of course, there's the part here, and then there's usually about a ridge or the widest part of your pommel. Your bottom hand can either go, at where the pommel starts, all the way down to the ridge on your pommel. If you go any further, pommeling people becomes dangerous to your pinky finger. So find a space that you like in there. I prefer actually just under the ridge in my pommel. That's where I prefer to put my hands. And this is where your hands stay. They do not ever switch. They don't switch directions. They stay in this position more or less the entirety of your sword career. Okay? So, basic guards. So first I'm going to go over Vom Tag, and I am actually going to write it in the chat. So we're going to do the 4 primary guards, which are Vom Tag, Ochs, Plow or Pflug, and Alber, or the Fool's Guard. So remember, Vom Tag means from the day, or the guard of the roof. Oops, I can't spell that right. From the roof. Ochs is, of course, ox. It's the same word. Pflug is plow, because it looks like handles of an old-fashioned plow. And then lastly, Alber is the Fool's Guard. That's all right. If you can't do high Vom Tag, then we'll do shoulder Vom Tag. It's one of the reasons people keep doing shoulder Vom Tag, despite the fact that I hate it. It's made for modern houses. All right, so high Vom Tag, if you can. If you can't, that's fine. But high Vom Tag, there's no way I'm going to get all of me in this, so I'm going to aim for my shoulders and the sword. And try not to hit my ceiling. So high Vom Tag, there we go, just barely, is directly over your head. The pommel should be directly over the crown of your head. The sword, as you can see, should be roughly 45 degrees back. If you do this, you are taking so much effort to bring your sword forward and so much telegraphing that there's no point in doing it. If you, I can't do it, but if you have your sword straight up, let's see if I can get low. If you have your sword straight up, then your opponent can see whatever your hands are doing, and anything you do will be telegraphed. Also, there's much more likely chance that you'll do this rather than that trigger pull that we were discussing, where you roll your fingers down and let the sword lead. Whereas this will break your wrists first, and then you have a crummy cut. So high Vom Tag should be here. Remember to shoulders forward, chest up, sword over your head. You should be fairly aggressive looking with this guard. And again, you can switch your feet. It doesn't matter. This is a left foot and a right foot guard. It is bifootal. It doesn't matter which foot you have forward. Shoulder Vom Tag, of course, is here. Like you're talking on a cell phone. The cross, I should turn this way. The cross and the schild are your cell phone. It should be carried nice and high. I kind of cheat a little and I drop, I don't think you can see that, I drop the quillion into the point of my shoulder, and that's how I know I'm in the right place. Your elbows should be in. If you have your elbows out like this, or God forbid like this, somebody will take your elbow off. It really sucks to get hit at the point of your elbow. So again, you should have shoulders forward, more or less. Obviously, whichever shoulder isn't holding the sword will be a little more forward, but you should be mostly shoulders squared up to your opponent, sword at the ready. This is not a lazy guard. It's not here for the same reasons that high Vom Tag isn't here. It is comfortably just at about a 45-degree angle right here, ready to strike out. Of course, if you're a righty, it's only on your right side. If you're a lefty, it's only on your left side. And the same thing applies. Keep your elbows down. Shoulders should be more or less forward. Sword, 45 degrees back in a striking position. All right, the two oxes. Because I'm going to do all the ones in the air first, so I don't have to rearrange the computer. The two oxes. If you are a righty, you will have your left foot forward. If we do right ox, I apologize. You will have your left foot forward, and your hands will be crossed. If the camera is my opponent's, ox will be here. You can see that my shoulders are turned sideways. I'm not totally sideways. I'm a little forward because of biomechanics. If I turn totally sideways, I can't strike very well, and my point wanders. But if I am turned into the sword and towards my opponent a little, I can keep my point much more solidly on line. So this is what it should look like. Remember, oxes carry their horns on their head. Your ox should be above your head. If it's here, if the camera is my opponent, look at how much is open on me right now. My head is open. Honestly, my elbows are a little open, and I'm not going to be fast enough in defending myself. Ox should be nice and comfortably here. So, to turn sideways to show you guys, if you are righty, you should be here. Your arms should be crossed. You make two nice, neat triangles. Triangles are, of course, the strongest shape. So you want to make two of them, one on the top here, one the little one, and then the one on the bottom between my elbows. You should be high enough over your head that you should be able to headbang. You don't want it so high up that when you headbang, you can't feel your arms. So mine is I can brush my head along my arm, but I can still headbang through my arms very comfortably. And again, if you're a right-handed person, you will be crossed arms. If you're a left-handed person, right ox will be open arms. Again, same thing. You want your ox above your head. You want to try and keep your elbows down. This will be the same for righties on the left side. The manuals actually show this, but like, I don't know anybody that can really do that. I will happily take your front arm being at a 90 degree and your back arm at a 45. Not up here, this exposes your shoulder. So, if you're a righty, and we're going to do left ox, again, we'll be here. Point on, body turned into the sword, not totally sideways, not totally forward, but about halfway. And you will be here. Again, just like the lefties on the right side, if you maintain a nice 90-degree forearm, wrong direction, nice 90 degrees here, that'll make your guard nice and strong, and then your backhand should be comfortably in this range, anywhere from here to about here. Here is too far. You can see my wrist is all hinky, and then on top of that, my shoulder is horrifically exposed. And you don't want to take all that pressure through your shoulder. So here. All right. So now for the lower ones. So we'll have Plow and Alber, and you get to, stare at the floor again. All right. So if you're ready, right Alber is here. Again, you should be turned not all the way into the sword, not all the way forward, but comfortably into the sword. The sword should be, you can see my tip is wandering sort of over my left chest. That way, the sword is between me and the opponent. So, very comfortably here. Again, just like I said in class, your thumb should be on the back of the sword. And so that way it gives you a little extra resistance to push that way when a hit comes in. And for me, my pommel sits comfortably right in the ridge of my hip. And it's a fairly comfortable guard. I'm not, tensed up. I'm not pushing my arms all the way down here. I'm just very comfortably here. Once again, your tip should be, just like in all these things, Ochs and Plow both, your tip should be roughly at the nose of your opponent. So like this. And then on the left side, again, with your thumb on the back. On the left side, if you're a righty, should be here. Again, very comfortable. My pommel sits in my hip crease right here, and it should be a very comfortable guard. And of course, the opposite will be true if you're a lefty. If you're a lefty on your left side, you'll be crossed hands, which I'm a little bad at because obviously I'm not a lefty. Sorry, just reading the chat. If you're a lefty, you'll be here on your left side, and on your right side, you'll be here. And Chris asked a good question. He said, is there a difference between guard up or flat on ox? Realistically speaking, the answer is no. Both have their pros and cons. The flat ox, which is this ox, so you can see my crossguard is flat versus my crossguard, maybe this will be easier, my crossguard is up and down versus my crossguard is flat. Flat, you keep your thumb on the underside. So like Plow, you can have a little extra resistance from force from above. I don't think I went over this in class, but if you prefer the flat ox and the thumb under, it rolls really neatly into into your plows. It's called the cone of defense. So you can go through all four guards just about without really moving your hands. See if I can do this on screen. I will try my best. So we're down here, and my thumb on the back. I roll up to Ochs. It's seamless. Come to here, flat Ochs, and roll down. So the transition, people argue, is quicker. I say do whatever you like. I prefer, thumb on the inside plow, and I roll my hands straight up over my head. But some people like that cone of defense visual so that they can see how their sword is protecting them from here. And you I'm not very good at this because I don't like it, but if you're better at this than I am, you can keep your tip in one place, and your sword literally rolls around the point and makes a cone of defense. So that's the difference between the two of them. So last but not least of the four primary guards is Alber, which is the fool's guard, which is straight down. Again, your shoulders should be forward. They should be squared up. You should have a nice straight back. Your arms should be down in front of you, sword directly between your legs. This is, of course, the direct opposite of Vom Tag. All right. So, does anybody have any questions before we go on to other guards? No questions? Okay. If there's no questions, we'll go on to the other guards. Let's see. So we did that. All right. Of course, during those first couple days, we learned Longpoint. Longpoint is Longenort. I'm sure Chris will yell at me. Longenort. Longpoint. Longpoint, like I had said in class, has many, many different variations. Most guards have at least one. Longpoint has a lot. Basically, as many guards as many cuts as there are, Longpoint has a variation because it is the longest point of the arc of your cut, regardless of what that cut is, just about. So your traditional Longpoint is here. Your arms are at their longest. Not that you can see, but my tip is ever so slightly above my hands. If you do this, you will break your thumb. See how my thumb is sticking out? Right down here is several bones, an artery, and a lot of nerve endings. If you get hit there enough, you will lose feeling in your hand. And if you're very unlucky, in the rest of your arm. So please, please, please allow the cross guard to do what it's supposed to. Allow it to protect you. Don't do this. Do this. It's a very slight adjustment. Now seeing it in video, I should mention women, especially if you have bigger breasts, you are likely to put your elbows over your boobs. Men are much more likely to extend their hands directly in front of their pecs. Whichever one works for you, male or female, it doesn't really matter because the difference here is here versus here. My arms are still long, they're still extended, my tip is still up. This I find works better for me, but I am short. As long as you don't end up, men have a tendency to do this specifically, as long as you don't end up in sort of a pseudo plow something or other, you should be fine. Just make sure if you're doing it at chest height that your arms remain long and almost plateaued out in front of you. If you're a woman and you have bigger breasts and it's uncomfortable to do it here, just raise your arms up and you'll have a nice solid plateau in front of your shoulders instead of in front of your chest, whichever you prefer. So that covers the guards on the first day. So before I forget, we're going to do the first basic cuts. So day 2 and 3, so long edge and short edge cuts. Of course, we have, let me write it down since lots of people asked for it. So, our basic long edge cuts that we have are Oberhau, Unterhau, and we learned the master cut, Zornhau. So, I had said that when somebody typically asks you for a basic Oberhau, it's often straight up and down, though the name also refers to a class of cuts that all come from above. I mean, it literally means the over cuts. So a Zornhau is also an Oberhau, but of course an Oberhau isn't a Zornhau. But when someone typically says, "Oh, throw me an Oberhau," what they mean is, "Please throw me a straight up and down cut." So the Oberhau, like we did in class, can be done straight from Vom Tag through Longpoint and into Alber, making sure that you go from guard to guard to guard, because again, the guards will protect you. It's in the name, they will guard you. If you don't use them, they won't guard you. So make sure that you're moving from one place to the next place to the next place, and make sure that your long point is fully extended, otherwise it's not helping you any. Remember, we don't want any T-Rexes in this class, only pterodactyls for nice long arms. So those of you who have a sword in hand and are following along, if you want to go ahead and do 10 Oberhaus with me, go ahead and do it. I'm going to see if I can't get most of me in the frame. That's not even close. There we go. I'm going to kneel down. Remember to go through Longpoint. Doesn't need to be fast, but try to make it smooth. Alrighty. So for the next one, of course, we need to remember Wechel, because that ends our Zornhau. And I will write Wechel in the chat. I think I can never spell this one correctly. Maybe Chris will help me out here. I'm really blanking on it. Sorry, Christian. Ah, thank you. Trust his spellings over mine. He's German. All right. So, Wechsel is a low guard. If you're righty, right Wechsel is palms down. It sits comfortably at the 45, so the space, the triangle between your feet and the point should be a triangle, with your sword at the point of that triangle. You should be almost totally turned into your sword. Obviously, look at your opponent, don't look at your sword, but look at your opponent. but the rest of you should almost be totally turned into your sword. And this is right Wechsel for right-handed people. Left Wechsel for righties will be here with your palms up. Again, your tip and the heels of your feet should make a nice triangle. You should be turned fairly into your sword, again looking forward because your opponent is over there, but your sword is protecting you here. So this is left Wechsel for right-handed people. The lefties, on the right, it is palms up, and on the left, it is palms down. Remember that the side of a guard refers solely to which side the sword is on, not which hand you are. So if I say right Wechsel, it doesn't matter if you're righty or lefty, your Wechsel should be on this side, either palms up or palms down. And again, this is a fairly relaxed guard. If you're doing it palms down, either lefty or righty, the sword and your forearm should be lined up. It makes a very strong starting position. And then on the opposite side, you get a little tangled up here with your wrist and your elbow, but that's to be expected because you can launch your sword and then your elbow can come nice and straight. This is not a guard to necessarily hit anything while you're in a guard. But it is a nice place to end. So when we're doing our Zornhaus, we're going to start in High Vom Tag, if I can't score up the ceiling, and go from High Vom Tag on an angle. I'm going to do right Zornhaus first. You're going to start in High Vom Tag, go on an angle, cut through the center line, in through the shoulder, out through the hip, and end up in Wechsel. So from High Vom Tag. And remember, you're going to take a passing step with this. So High Vom Tag, step, cut through Longpoint, and end in Wechsel. Okay? So that's High Vom Tag, cut through, and end in Wechsel. On the other side, if you have your right foot forward from High Vom Tag, you're going to cut from left to right. You're going to cut from High Vom Tag, cut left to right. From here, left to right. And now I'll do it sideways for you. So that way you can see where my sword is moving a little better. We're about to have a guest. Hi, Cooper. Luckily, he's a very cute guest, but he is going to get hit with a sword.
Cooper, come on.
Go, buddy. All right. From High Vom Tag to Wechsel. And then left to right, right foot forward. So I'm going to hit light. There we go. Make sure that your cut angles are going in through the shoulder, out through the hip. In through the shoulder, and out through the hip. It's not quite a 45, it's a little steeper than that, but a 45 gets the idea in your head. So, that on this angle. Okay, so go ahead if you're following along with a sword or a hammer or a battering ram. Go ahead and do 5 right Zornhaus and 5 left Zornhaus. I'm going to see if I can't follow along with you and not hit the ceiling. Or fall over. can't die. Alrighty. So, hopefully people saw that. All right, so we'll move on to Unterhaus. And for Unterhau, we need to remember Nebenhut, which is the side guard. Nebenhut. Oops. Put that in chat for you guys. So if you recall, Nebenhut is as if you have a sword in a scabbard on your hip. That is where your hands go. And remember, your hands live in this position. Even if it feels more, reasonable to take your hand off the sword, it's not. It doesn't go this way. Your hand always stays in this position. So right Nebenhut goes here. It should be about, like I said, as if you're carrying a sword in your scabbard on your hip. That's about comfortable for 99% of people. So here. And ideally, your tip should go behind your pommel because I think you can see it on the camera. If my tip is out this way, you can see what I'm doing because you can see my tip. If my tip is this way, you can see that my handle's out of place, so you also know what I'm doing next. Here, though, my pommel and my tip are straight onto the camera, and you can't see what I'm doing next. So here. Okay, so this is right Nebenhut for righties. Left Nebenhut for righties is a little more difficult. You end up with your hands crossed and often mostly off the sword. That's okay. You can just grab the sword when you make your cut. So again, it'll be here. Very comfortably on your hip. You shouldn't have to pull it up. You shouldn't have to push it down. It should sit fairly comfortably about on your hip or in your hip crease. So here. And of course, if you're a lefty, on the right side, it'll be here with your hand off the sword, more or less. Some people can grab it, I cannot. And then on the left side for lefties will be here. All right, so from Nebenhut, of course, we like to do Unterhaus, the undercuts. It's a convenient place to do it, though again, you should be able to do every cut from every guard. But if you're writing a right Unterhau, which again will be the opposite of your Zornhau, it would be in through the hip, out through the shoulder. So you're going to take your arms and start in Nebenhut, swing your arms up, and end in Ochs. Preferably speaking, you want to end in a slightly extended Ochs so that your cut ends up going through inverted Longpoint. Your arms are at their longest extension without doing any of this nonsense. And then you'll end up in a slightly extended Ochs. It's the same as the other Ochs, it's just longer. So, see if I can't get all this on camera. I'll go this way. So, I'm fencing the light. So from here to here. And that was not as long as it should have been, but I was going to hit the light. So from here to here. Ideally, when your foot hits the floor is when your sword hits the target. On the left side, as they're right-handed, it's even easier because your arms stay crossed. You're going to go from Nebenhut directly to right Ochs. So from here, let me turn a little so you can see that better. So from here to here. Go ahead and do 5 on each side. So five right Unterhaus and 5 left Unterhaus. So from the right, starting in Nebenhut, going through inverted Longpoint, up to Ochs. Alrighty. Does anybody have any questions about long edge cuts or the guards we just did? No questions at all? Okay. Oh. Left Nebenhut for righties. Sure thing. All right. You know what? Let me see if I can get closer to the camera for you. Does that help for you? I hook my thumb over the grip because you can still pull down and move the sword here, and when you come up for your cut, you can grab the sword midway. Sure. I think I might even be able to do it this close to the camera. So from here, I will try my damnedest to get this on camera. To here. Oh, I'm gonna have to do Meyer stances. From here to here. All right, no problem. Anybody else have questions before we move on? Alrighty. Okay, so short edge cuts and Scheitalhau. So normally what I'd have you guys do is just do the paddle drill that we did. The one if you kayak, you know what it feels like to kayak with a feathered paddle. And then we'd do 5 from either side. So mirroring the long edge cuts that we just did. So from right to center and then left to center. So that should be good. All right. So again, the drill is if you stand, not that you can see my feet, but if you stand with your feet pointing forward in a horse stance, so both feet forward, even. And you go from Ochs to opposite side Nebenhut, to same side Ochs, to opposite side Nebenhut, to same side Ochs, and flow around like this. If you have kayaked before, this will feel very familiar. And you'll see there is a lot of work with my hips and my shoulders, getting the sword around and around. It is making an infinity cut in the air, which I know you guys love. And my handle's coming apart. So from Ochs to opposite side Nebenhut to same side Ochs to opposite side Nebenhut to same side Ochs and around and around. And I'll do it this way so you can see my hands. So here. You shouldn't have a death grip on your hands. Your hands should be loose enough to allow the sword to kind of roll in them, kind of like this. Of course, again, you're not totally moving your hands around. You're just allowing the sword to roll over your thumb and finger, which will make this a lot easier when you can come here and roll it up and over, and here and roll it up and over. And those are short edge cuts from the outside to the inside to the outside to the inside. If you break those down, you get this cut. You can come from, it's easiest to start this one from shoulder Vom Tag, and you punch it out into Ochs. But you make sure that your tip comes from the outside to the inside. So from here, outside, inside. I don't know if this angle will help, but I will try for you. And those of you may remember that I was yelling at you. So when you come to about this point, the weight of the sword sits really comfortably in your hand. You can do anything with it, provided it doesn't tip over. But with the weight of your sword in your hand, you can kind of do whatever you want because the weight is right here in your hand. So to flip the sword over without coming around and smacking anybody, you punch it forward as if you're just going to do one of those long edge cuts. But about when you get to here, again, where the weight is in your hand, you take your hand and invert it. From here, invert your hand. And so that way, you can finish up your cut and the tip of the sword is, or the motion of the sword is still moving in that same arc from right to center. So it comes forward, forward, invert down. And it's that invert that gets the, instead of this cut, or I should say this cut, it gets you this cut. Because you can flip your hand over and now you have different biomechanics. So from here, comes out, rolls over, finishes the cut. And that'll get you that same outside to inside as if you were doing a long edge cut. Does that make sense? I'm gonna go with yes. Of course, starting from shoulder Vom Tag on your dominant side becomes problematic when you go to your opposite side, which is normally why I start you guys on high Vom Tag. Oh, thank you, Janet. Which is normally why I start you guys on high Vom Tag, because the implication is, oh, well, you know, if I can do it from my dominant side Vom Tag, then there must be a non-dominant side Vom Tag. And this is bad. You can see my wrist is all sorts of cockeyed. My elbow, my wrist, everything about this. It's like a terrible backhanded punch where you're punching with, you know, my watch, basically. This is a terrible decision. So, if you feel comfortable practicing it on your dominant side, from your dominant side shoulder Vom Tag, that's fine. But when you go to the opposite side, know that this isn't a thing. So that's why normally I teach you guys from high Vom Tag. So it's the same idea. You come from high Vom Tag, You punch it forward as if you're doing a regular long edge cut. And when you get here, you invert your hands and end in this nice, long, extended ox. So this is a right short edge cut. And on the left side, if I switch my feet, you come from here, and it'll end in open hands. You might notice that my Vom Tag is a little flat. It's because I'm desperately trying not to hit my ceiling. I'm sorry. My form is suffering a little here. But from here, out and around. Come from here, you move forward as if you're doing a long edge cut. And then again, about here, when the weight is in your hand, invert your hands. And look at that, you've ended up in ox. So this comes from the outside, from the left, to the center. And you can just hammer it or drop it, if that helps you, into their shoulder. Okay? So, those of you following along, if you want to do 5 from either side, 5 right short edge cuts, so right to center, and then 5 left short edge cuts, left to center, go ahead and do that. While you're doing that, we'll discuss Scheitalhau. Because like I said, Zornhau is a master cut, is a Meisterhau, but it's an awesome Meisterhau because it defeats basically everything. I know there are some people who take issue with me on that, but there's a reason often half of the manuals are written about plays about Zornhau. Scheitalhau is the first one we have that breaks one of the 4 primary guards. 4 my primary guards, of course, being Vom Tag, Ochs, Alber, and Pflug. Scheitalhau breaks Lord above. Scheitalhau breaks Plow. I apologize. I'm putting Scheitalhau into the chat so you can see how it's spelled. It is the squinting cut, because some of the masters say you should squint at the tip of their sword like you're going to hit it, and then you don't. Or you squint at various areas and then don't hit that. You squint at their I think it's this shoulder, but you actually hit them on this shoulder, things like that. Scheitalhau is often much more vertical. So the cuts you just did were on angles like this. Scheitalhau is the exact same body mechanics, but different placement. So it comes up and drops straight down instead of going to the opposite shoulder. So if somebody, this is a little hard to do because I don't have a partner with me, but if somebody is in, say, right plow, then you want to end up doing a left Scheitalhau onto their left shoulder, because that places, if you can visualize this, I know this is hard, I apologize, it will be their sword, them. Should do it this way. Their sword, them, and then you, and you put your sword here, here. And then the person on the other side of that. So you kind of have a sword sandwich. So you'll have person, sword, sword, person, because you want your sword between you and them, preferably with their sword in the sword sandwich, so that you don't get hurt, mostly. Because remember, the idea of this is not to get points necessarily. The idea is to protect yourself first, then hit them. And in this particular case, because it is a Meisterhau, you will end up, if you do it correctly at the right time, etc., you will hit them, and they will not be able to hit you back, because you are now in this sword sandwich. So, if anything, I mean, you've just put your sword either in their skull or down the side of their neck. They're not fighting you back. And again, Scheitalhau breaks Plow by making them move out of their guard. Not, of course, because you took the sword, snapped it in half, and threw it over your shoulder. However cool that would be. So, just like most things, there's a right and a left Scheitalhau. This side and this side. It's the same short edge cuts you just did, just slightly different theory. Does that make sense to everyone before we go into Zwerchhau and Krumphau? All right, sounds like I'm getting the vote of approval. So in that case, I will move on. All right. Okay, so next up was Zwerchhau, which is the thwart cut, because the name is a weird. Thwart used to mean not just I thwart your plans, but also across. You go across something. You go athwart something. It is a very old word. It is almost never used in that context. And the only place you will find it is in Navy terminology, in both English and German, actually, which is great. If you go across the center of a ship's deck, you have gone athwart ships. Fun knowledge for today. So, just like you might go across a ship, in this case, the cut is going across the side of your head, or your opponent's head, ideally, right about here. You are aiming, wrong side, you are aiming for their temple. The temple is the thinnest and weakest part of your skull. It is, I think, millimeters thick. It's not very thick at all. Those of you who have stood up into a cabinet too quickly and got clonked here will know that even a small tap will kind of set you back on your feet, reeling a little bit, because it's just, your brain is, right behind there. So if you really deliver one of these into the side of somebody's head, you will kill them. Exactly. It is the instant migrate button. It is not a fun place to be hit. So imagine if you're doing it with 3 pounds, 4-foot piece of steel. The game is over. And that's why Zwerchhau is also one of the master cuts. Like we taught in week 5, Zwerchhau can be done with both the triangle step and the weaving step. There is a little bit of theory on which one to use when. Again, you can use any cut with any step at any time. The weaving step comes with the added baggage of theory. So, let's go over real quick what the Zwerchhau looks like and how to get there. I'm going to lower the screen again. All right, so to get to your Zwerchhau, there we go. You can stand almost like you're an Alber with your feet square, but with the flat aimed up. You put your thumb on the top and then shoot that up over your head. From here, you move your hips and your bottom hand and send your sword around your head from ox to ox. You will notice that my hips are twisting in this because it is required of the cut. If you don't, you will at best crack your back. At worst, you will hurt your back. So please twist your hips. So you should go from ox to ox. And this will be your Zwerchhau. So on your right side, it is a short edge cut. On your left side, it is a long edge cut. And if you guys remember, a long edge cut is done with your knuckles towards enemy. A short edge cut is done with your thumb towards enemy. So, short edge cut, without hitting anything, long edge cut. There's a reason we call this the helicopter cut. Your hands need to stay above your head. If they do not, and you kind of start doing this, well, that's not a Zwerchhau, is it? I don't know what it is, but it's not a Zwerchhau. The whole point is you are protected in this position. You are in ox, and you're in Ochs, and in the middle, you throw a devastating cut. So let's see if I can't get both with the footwork. So, Zwerchhau works best offline. Walking into somebody is, not generally considered a good idea. So, you can either do this with your triangle step. I will back up. You can either do this with your triangle step or with your weaving step, which, if you recall, I put my left foot out. My opponent walks towards my right side. So they move this way into me. So if we're on a circle, we move together on the circle. So they're going to go this way. They don't know what I'm going to do, but I throw my foot out. They've moved towards me. I'm going to step out to the right and deliver a zwerch straight into the side of their head. And those of you that were in class will remember that with the weaving step, it puts their head directly into your blade and they cannot do anything about it. It's a wonderful feeling. On the opposite side, if you have your right foot forward, left foot back for righties, you can step out with your triangle step here. Or if you're fighting a lefty, you can throw your right foot out for that feint. And then again, take your back foot. It shoots off diagonally away from you. And you stick it straight into their skull. Remember, the important part with the weaving step is you have to let that first foot go first. Because without it, there's no reason for your opponent to move. Your left foot shooting out is what makes your opponent move. Otherwise, if you just take the step and the step, then you've kind of given away the game. So, those of you following along, if you want to, or if you have the room, you can do one of two things. You can either start in a horse stance. Remember, feet square, body forward. You can go in a horse stance and do 10 of these. So 1, 1, 2, 2. Or if you have the room, you can do 5 triangle steps, right and left, and then 5 weaving step Zwerchhaus. So you can start from Vom Tag and go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then once you're done with those 10, you start here, you throw your left foot out, step out, 1. And you can restart. Right foot forward, right foot out, step out, 1, and so on. That one will be a little slower, but if you would like to, go ahead and do that now. However much room you have in your house. Oops, I did not write Zwerchhau. All right, I will type this out for you guys. Footwork. And of course, the Zwerchhau, being a master cut, breaks Vom Tag, any variation. So if you're in high Vom Tag, again, it cuts for under your arms. And for those of you who have ever been hit under your arms, it's very painful. We're just not used to being hit there by anything. Also, there's... you can't see in the day. I'm usually white enough. But there is a major blood vessel artery that runs under here. Those of you who have had kids have probably in your past taken a brachial thermometer and done it under here. If you cut that open, you bleed to death. Well, ideally your opponent bleeds to death. Also, again, very painful. If you are in shoulder Vom Tag, it's not worth it to do the cut on the same side as the sword because there's a sword there. It'll just kind of flop into their head and make them irritable. But on the other side, they're wide open. You absolutely should go for that. If they don't move, then you drive it straight into their skull. And that's how Zwerchhau breaks Vom Tag. because, again, it requires you to move out of your guard to defend yourself from this basically one shot. So, does that make sense to everyone? Before I move on to Krumphau? Alrighty. Thank you guys so much for giving me feedback. It's very hard to do when I can't see anyone. Alright, so Krumphau, the crooked cuts. So named because your sword goes one direction and you go the other. Again, you can do this one the traditional way, which is with the triangle step, or you can do this with the KdF weaving step. So the very basic mechanics is you're going to pretend like you are a windshield wiper. So to start this, you can stand horse stance. I'm just going to stand perpendicular to you guys. Stick your hands out, and you're going to become a windshield wiper. Just like this. To get the feeling of the rotation in your wrists. Now, pretend like you are a windshield wiper, but you are now standing at the front of your car. There's a hood in front of you, and your windshield is on an angle, right? So now you have to windshield wipe your car's windshield from the hood. So instead of being strictly perpendicular to you, you're going to lay your tip out ever so slightly, like this. And that is your basic motion. So you end up here. Sorry, I was reading the chat. Andrew brought up a good point. I'm not sure that in day 6 this class I did the triangle step with the Krumphau. So we will go over that shortly. So that's your movement. Your right hand, or your dominant hand, your top hand, stays more or less in front of your chest, and your bottom hand is the one that propels your sword up and down. Because this is your barrier. This is your guard here. All it has to do is rotate. Because remember, this is your strength and control. This gives you the oomph and allows you to do some of the fun stuff. But without a good base, you can't do a lot of the fun stuff. So your right hand, or your top hand, stays more or less in front of your chest, and your left hand is the one that pushes and pulls the sword around. So speaking of barriers, I have to get to Andrew's favorite guard, which is Schrankhut. Let's see if I can remember to spell that correctly. Schrankhut. So, typically, if you are in Schrankhut, chances are you are going to do a Krumphau. That being said, again, I will reiterate, you can do every cut from every guard. Some of them are more difficult than others, but you can, I promise. But typically speaking, if you see somebody in Schrankhut, chances are they're coming for you in a Krumphau. So, Schrankhut, the barrier guard. It's a real pain. It hurts people's wrists a lot. All right. So, if you have your sword straight out in front of you with your thumb on the back, you're going to take the sword and without removing your hands from the sword, flip it upside down. If you're in a nice stance, you should have your right hand just about, or your dominant hand, just about in the center of your chest, your top hand up here, and your tip should be in front of your back foot. Like this. It is deeply uncomfortable to stay here for very long. But this is Schrankhut on your right side. This is right side Schrankhut. So here, I don't know if that's helpful even a little, but this is right side Schrankhut for righties. Left side Schrankhut will be crossed hands. The same idea. Your right hand is more or less in front of your chest, and your tip ends up in front of your back foot. It is a strong barrier, like this. So from here, you can see how easy it is to start from here and push down on your back hand and flip the sword up and over. That being said, when you do Krumphau, you don't actually want to go, in this particular case, singular case, you don't actually want to go from Schrankhut to Schrankhut, because if you put some oomph onto this cut, like you probably will, you will end up over cranking, and your wrists will really hurt after you're done. So where we want to stop with Krumphau is you start in Schrankhut and you come to almost the middle here. So from here to here. And if you recall, I had said that, and this will be hard to show on video, I had said that Krumphau can be perpendicular to you, almost. That's you going for the sword, and then presumably you have something that you're following it up with. So you can hit perpendicular, you can hit at an angle, so like 45 degrees, and you can hit almost straight out. And that would be your longest guard, or your longest cut, I should say. Each one targets a different area. So if you have your cut fairly perpendicular to you, again, you're probably aiming for the sword. You're probably going for a suppressing move into the sword and following it up with something else. If you are aiming a little more at an angle, you're probably going for their hands, maybe an exposed elbow. If you step deep enough, maybe straight to the skull. Depends. If you end up almost straight as Krumphau's can go, which, if you remember, is not here, because this ends up being sort of a crummy Oberhau. You have to have the pommel on the outside of your arm. Otherwise, it's not a Krumphau. It's just a crummy Oberhau. So this is a Krumphau. But that is about as straight as you can get a Krumphau. You can come from here to here to here. And this is, you probably stepped fairly far out, and you're either lining up for a thrust of some variety, or you're aiming between the arms, sort of up this line. So they're all slightly different ranges. With the triangle step, let me show you guys what that looks like. All right. So those of you, if you're experienced and you're following along, go ahead and do 5 on each side of triangle steps and Krumphau's. Those of you who are not, I need to turn the computer down more. Okay. So again, you start in your nice stance. You start in your Schrankhut. You step out and cut here. Here, step out. And remember that you're aiming for up here on somebody, because Krumphau breaks Ochs. So you're aiming high. I'm aiming low because I don't have somebody in front of me, but I will do better. Here. And this will end up with a triangle step. You'll probably end up hitting about here, about the usual spot. If you're doing your weaving step, when you do Zwerchhau, it's when they step closer to you on your circle. If you two step with each other, that's when you do the Krumphau. So if you're hanging out here, you throw your left foot out, and they move off to your left, you step out and straight into their arms. It is really nice and convenient because, again, they step directly into the range of your sword. And that one might be closer. You might end up almost halfway down the blade, and that's fine. The weaving step, in part, is designed so that you can get in closer to start wrestling. So that's perfectly acceptable if you end up crumping somebody a little further down the blade than you're used to. That's fine. Just be aware that you are stepping closer, and you are now probably within wrestling range. So again, on the right side, you have Schrankhut. You feint with that left foot. They move to your left. You step out with your right and crump them. Okay? You can do the same thing on your left. Schrankhut on your left is here with your hands all twisted up, and you pull down with your left hand and unwind your sword. It's a little more unwieldy for righties on the left side because you end up unwinding into open hands versus a steady crossed hands. So the opposite will be true for lefties. On their dominant side, you will have a crossed hands Krumphau. On your non-dominant side, which I cannot do very well, you will have an open hands Krumphau. All right. Again, if you are following along, go ahead and do 5 Krumphaus on either side, either doing the triangle step or the weaving step, or preferably both, if you want to do 20 of them. So five triangle step on each side, and then 5 weaving step on each side. Those of you who are not physically following along, does that make sense? Any questions? Or any clarifications? All right. So again, I think I mentioned it, but I'll reiterate. Krumphau breaks Ochs. Again, it requires them to move out of Ochs. You preferably want to use, if you are a righty and they're in right Ochs, you want to use right Krumphau because you are aiming for the left side of their head, because that is what's open. You want to aim for where the sword is not, preferably speaking. So it requires them to break their guard because otherwise they're not going to have a skull very shortly, or a face, or whatever target you're aiming for. And now it occurs to me that if I am going to teach what we learn on day 7, I need a victim. I'm going to go grab my husband real quick, and I will teach you guys Scheitalhau. I will be right back. Go ahead and practice some of those cuts. If you're doing them, do some footwork, and I will be back in just a jiffy. Alrighty, so if all that makes sense, I am going to introduce Scheitalhau, which is my least favorite cut. I hate it very much. And I know I'm spelling it wrong, so if Chris is still on, maybe he'll correct my spelling. Scheitalhau is better known as the scalp cut. There are several different ways to do it. I am going to teach you the one that I learned and I dislike immensely. A note, if you are short, do not attempt to do this on somebody who's taller than you. It is my least favorite because it hurts my wrists and I'm short. So, to prove a point, I grabbed my husband, Chris. Say hi, Chris.
Hello.
So, I am going to Scheitalhau his scalp off. And hopefully we can both be in the frame at the same time, which would be really nice. So the Scheitalhau is an Oberhau. What you were aiming for is the scalp. You are aiming for your bleeding head wound. They said hello. So you are aiming for a bleeding head wound. If you've ever had a head wound or picked at a scab, you'll know that they never, ever, ever stop bleeding. So if you are in a fight and the person doesn't have a helmet on or anything else, any other protective covering, and you slice them right across here, and the blood starts pouring down into their eyes, you've already won the battle. So from a tactical standpoint, it is a very, very useful cut. Logistically, it makes a little less sense, but we'll go over that in just a second. So we will start this from Vom Tag, and we are aiming to go here, but not actually into the head. We're aiming to go from here and roll it back across their head for the maximum amount of damage. All right. So, there we go. So if I take Chris's head here, what I am aiming to do, this is going to be difficult. What I'm aiming to do is come down here, almost place it on his head, and ride it up. You see in a lot of the books that it ends here. This has been the subject of much debate. You can see why my wrist is a little curved up. And I have said consistently throughout this whole class that you never let your wrist go kinky. If Chris was wearing a mask, which he is not, you would feel and hear that when you dunk into this part of the mask, it makes a very, very specific sound that lets you know that you've hit it correctly. So it's almost, the first part is almost percussive. You're aiming almost like you're trying to stick your sword into their skull, and then you slice up and over, almost along the part in someone's hair. So, again, you're aiming to thunk and ride that sucker up, which is why if somebody is significantly taller than you, I could probably do this to Chris safely. But if somebody is significantly taller than you, it's not worth your time. Chris is much more likely to get a solid hit on me than I am on him with this cut. So again, if you're doing this from Vom Tag, which is, a good place to do it because you get the gravity with your percussive force cut here, and ride up, and your hands end up in this weird position with your sword almost parallel with the floor. Some people say that you hit the head and you roll your hands this way, so that way your wrists are underneath your sword and they're straight. But again, this is one of those cuts that has millions of variations. Like Oberhau, this one is bipedal and bifootal, so it doesn't really matter because you're coming from Vom Tag, preferably. So it doesn't really matter which foot is forward, as long as your cut maintains the same force. And again, you're coming down and riding that sucker up over their head, creating that massive scalp wound. So now Chris is blind, he can't see, and then I can kill him. Thank you, love. So, Scheitalhau, by necessity, then, breaks Alber. That's our last master cut, and our last of the four primary guards. So Scheitalhau breaks Alber. For years and years and years and years, you would see two people line up, one in Alber, one in Vom Tag, and then the next frame you would see is this. Because if you walk straight onto the point with this, if you take a simple passing step forward, you will be skewered. The person in Alber will simply flip their sword up and drive it up under your ribs. So to do this cut properly, you absolutely need to take at very least a triangle step. So that way you step offline around their point and then again, ride it up their skull so now that they have blood in their face. That one is a little hard to practice in the air, unfortunately. It's one of those that if you have something to thunk into, Those of you more experienced, if you have a Pell or just an old tire out there somewhere on a stick, I don't know why you would, but swords people have weird stuff. It's one of those things where you can thunk it straight into the tire and then ride it up with your hands. You really almost thunk it in here and push forward, and it's the skull that kind of makes the cut curve. Because again, you're trying to get that seam up and over their head so that they stop fighting you. And again, it breaks Alber because they are down low. It requires them to do something, to move out of the guard, because otherwise what's going to happen next is their head is going to be, open to the public, which is typically not how you like your skull. So that actually brings us to the end of class. So just in summary, the 4 primary guards are Vom Tag, on the roof, Ochs, like the horns of an ox, Plow or Pflug, like you're holding onto an old-timey plow with, the 2 handles and the plowshare in front of you. Alber, which is the fool's guard. And the 4 cuts that break those guards are Zwerchhau, breaks Vom Tag, Krumphau, breaks Ochs, Scheitalhau, breaks Plow, and Scheitalhau breaks Alber. So does that make sense to everyone? Does anyone have any questions? Because if not, that'll about be the end of class. Yeah, practice makes perfect, like in all things. I could do this again next week, but I don't know what I would teach. Week 8 is typically, you guys don't, it's not a regular class. You don't start with your regular warm-up. We jump straight into sparring games, so you guys get paired up against the old heads. And they're designed so that you can kind of get your blood up. Learn what it's like to move a little faster, to move against somebody else, especially someone more experienced. And we play a couple games to basically make you think. One of them is highs versus lows. One partner can only cut from above, the other partner can only cut from below. Against the wall, which is one person is on the wall, you can't move, so you can't advance or retreat. You can switch your feet, but you have to defend yourself from all cuts. It sounds scarier than it is. Of course, we always ask that the old heads take it easy on you. And if the old heads can't take what's coming from you guys, then maybe they should retake the beginner's class. So, each pair switches. One person gets to be on the wall, one person gets to cut. We play 7 Up, which is a dumb name for basically what I just told you. The person leading it shows off a guard, and you have to do the appropriate cut that breaks it. So it's only 4 guards. It's the 4 primary guards and the 4 cuts that break them. And then after that, this whole second half of class is dedicated to tournaments, or to the tournament. Normally, for like the last year and a half, it's only been the beginner's class because there's been a lot of you. Sometimes we throw in a couple old heads, but not lately. And given that there were 27 of you, it would be beginners only. So that's what you're missing out on right now. Hopefully, that being said, hopefully when this is all over, we will either do, obviously we'll do day 7 and 8, but depending when this breaks, hopefully in April, the May beginners class starts the first Monday of May. So if, God forbid, this goes on to the last 2 weeks, the last 2 Mondays of April, hopefully we won't run into the beginners class, or the May beginners class. And if we do, we will make sure to have a rookie tournament for you guys, because it's unfair that you get gypped out of it. So it will either run on Thursday or, we'll just figure out something. Like I said, we're keeping an eye on, changing conditions. The governor hasn't shut the state down yet in its entirety. We don't have a shelter in place. The governor is getting more testing kits and all that. So ideally, given the 2 weeks of the state being basically shut down, hopefully that will have flattened the curve enough that maybe he will consider reopening gyms and other smaller meeting places, on a preliminary basis or something like that, and we can get you guys sorted out. But does anybody have any other questions before we go? Absolutely. Yeah, if you're back in town for the Maze Beginners class, absolutely. Um, you won't be charged for it either because you've already been through one. So it ends up basically being your dues. So you're good. And probably a better place to be in Nebraska than Maryland. Um, so I will let you guys know what's going on as I know about it, as presumably the rest of the state knows about it. If we have this next week, what I might do is figure out footwork drills. And depending on how many people say they have a sword or a sword-like object, we could do just basic sword work drills or footwork drills. Or if people want, like, I can do ladder drills. We'll take. I think probably this week I'll put up some kind of poll and ask what people would like to see next, because no one knows how long this will last. So, any other questions before we get going? Well, alrighty. If there are no more questions, then thank you guys so very much for hanging out with me for, basically class for the last 2 hours. I super appreciate it. And those of you that are newbies and not old heads on this channel, I hope you guys come and join us after all this is done. We would love to have you guys. Um, and hopefully that won't be too much longer. So this is also has been recorded. I don't think the chat is recorded, so some of my comments will probably sound inane. But this is recorded, so if you guys want a study guide, for the rest of the shutdown, or even after we're done, this will be a good place to get a basic overview. Oh, okay, I didn't know the chat was recorded. So yes, this will be a basic overview for everything we've done in the beginners class. So it'll be a good resource to look back on, even when you get more experienced. So if that's all, I will hopefully maybe see you guys next Monday. And again, if you want to see anything specific on these, let me know. If you want to see a class from somebody else, let me know. I can set them up with this Twitch channel as well. And, other people in the club can, do classes for you guys during the plague. So otherwise, I will post this as soon as I figure out how to find the recording. And otherwise, see you guys later and have a lovely night and a good rest of your week.